Hi, it's Steve. Today we're going to show you how to change the blower wheel and the housing on your dryer, and it's a really easy job. All we're going to need is a number 2 Phillips screwdriver. We may need a small flat blade screwdriver, a pair of locking pliers, and a 7/8 socket with an extension and a ratchet. Let me show you how we do it. Now before we begin this repair, the first thing we'll need to do is to disconnect power to the dryer. So if it has a cord on it, simply unplug it, or if it's a hardwired dryer, locate the fuse or breaker panel and turn the power off there. We'll next want to pull that dryer out far enough that we can access 2 screws that secure the top to the cabinet. And we'll remove those 2 screws and just slide that top back about 1/2 inch and then lift it off and set it aside. Now our next step will be to remove 2 screws at the very top that secure the brackets that hold the control panel in place. Then lift the control panel up and tilt it back out of the way. And then we'll remove the 2 top ones. We'll have to hold that panel up against the cabinet so that it doesn't become dislodged. Now our next step will be to open the door. We're going to remove these 2 screws just below the lint filter. Then we'll also remove 2 screws at the very bottom that secure the bottom of the front panel. And next we'll disconnect this 2-wire harness to the door switch. And we'll also remove a single black wire that is attached to the light bulb. And then we can remove the top 2 screws securing that front panel to the cabinet. And we'll want to support that whole assembly as we do that. Now with all the screws removed, we're next just going to lift up on the front panel to disengage 4 clips that hold it into the cabinet. Then we'll turn it around so that we can access the door catch. Now next we'll need to remove this front bulkhead, and to do so we'll want to either detach that zip tie that holds the wire harness to it, or cut it and replace it. It looks like there's lots of room to remove this one, so we're just going to take a thin flat blade screwdriver. We're going to release that catch and we'll pull it off. We'll next remove that single white wire from the light bulb, and then disconnect the 2 harness connectors by first releasing the locking tabs and then pulling them apart. And then we'll set the console aside. Now next we'll remove 2 screws that secure this support bracket from the back to the front, and then just lift the little metal tabs out of the slots. And then we'll remove 2 Phillips screws on the bottom, and then we'll just lift that front bulkhead away from the drum. You may need to just lift up on the drum enough to release it. And then we'll set that aside. Now our next step will be to release the belt tension on the drum. So we're just going to reach in on the right hand side here and then in through the center until we feel both sides of that belt. And you'll feel that it, from the left side, it goes over across the top of an idler pulley and then down onto the pulley on the drive motor. So grasp that idler pulley, pull it to the left, release the tension, slide the belt off the motor pulley. Now at this point we can use that belt to support the weight of the drum. We're just going to lift up on it. Clears the rear drum rollers. And we'll pull the whole drum right out of the dryer. Now that we have the drum out of the way, our next step will be to remove the thermistor from the front of the blower housing. So simply take the 2 screws out and then just set that out of the way. We'll next take this little rubber gasket, pull that back onto the metal outlet duct. Next, we'll take 2 screws out of the front, secure it to the base. Now next, we'll remove the idler pulley assembly, and it just lifts off of a little pivot point to the left side of the motor, and there's a spring attached to the right side. So just carefully lift it up, make sure that the spring is still attached to the bottom, and just lay that down at the back. And what we'll do next is we'll take our locking pliers. We're just going to carefully grasp that motor pulley, just tight enough that we don't damage the pulley, but we actually get a good grip on it. Then the center of the blower wheel hub has a 7/8 hex shape on it. We'll use our socket and extension, and it is a left-hand thread, which means that we're going to turn it clockwise to loosen it. So with that socket firmly on the blower wheel, just turn it clockwise so it breaks free. Then we can just spin that blower wheel right off the motor shaft. Now there is also a locking device at the back of that blower housing that fits down onto the front of the motor. So take a flat blade screwdriver and just pry that tab out enough that we can lift that up and remove it. Then lift up on the front of the motor. Once you lift up on that enough, that will free the bottom half of that front portion of the motor and the blower housing, and we can lift it away. That motor sets right in this area here. We just need to lift that up out of that little channel. We can now discard the old blower housing and blower. Now when installing the new housing, we're also going to line up these 2 little tabs with these slotted openings in the base of the dryer. And we also need to make sure that the front bushing on that motor sets firmly down into this little U-shaped channel on the back of the housing. Now, as we slide that housing and blower into position, we'll want to center up the hub of that blower wheel on the motor shaft to allow us to push it straight back. So we'll start by doing that. Just tuck the end of the housing into the outlet duct and lift the motor up enough that we can line up that blower wheel. And once we've got it started into that hub of that blower wheel, we can then lift up on the motor and then slide the whole housing back into place, lining up those 2 tabs on the bottom. Make sure they go firmly back into position. Now at this point we can rotate that blower wheel counterclockwise. Just tighten it onto that motor shaft. We'll just snug that up for now. And again, we want to make sure that we have the housing back into position, that the tabs at the rear are fully engaged. We'll reinstall the locking device on the front hub. Press that down until it locks into place. We'll install the 2 screws down through the housing into the base. Next, we'll install the screws down through the front of the blower housing into the base. And if you have the housing in its correct position. Those should thread in straight. And tighten both of those securely. We can then take our ratchet and socket and we'll tighten that blower wheel. Make sure it's firmly onto the hub of that wheel, and then just give it a little bit of torque to tighten it. Remove the locking pliers from the rear. Make sure it turns freely. We'll then reposition the idler. Make sure the spring is attached on the hooked end, and set the fork down over that pivot. It should stay in position. We'll pull the thermistor around and attach it to the front of the blower housing and tighten those both securely. And now we can put the drum and belt back on. Now when installing the drum, the first thing we'll do is we'll loop the belt around it, keeping the groove side of the belt against the face of the drum. Then we're just going to lift it into position. And once we get it to the back, we'll want to make sure that we have it sitting up on top of the drum rollers. And just make sure that it will sit flush and rotate. Now at this point we can go in and reconnect that belt to the idler and motor pulleys. Now when installing the belt, we will have it draped around the drum, and it's actually going to come down and loop around that motor pulley. And it will go across the top of the idler and up either side of the drum. So we'll reach in on the right hand side, grab the belt, make sure that it's still flat against the drum. Same thing through the center. And we're going to pull that belt from the center over across the top of the idler pulley. We'll grasp that idler pulley to put some tension on the spring. And then we'll rotate the belt down onto the motor pulley. And then just by feel, make sure that we have it centered on that motor pulley. And then we should be able to take that and rotate it, and you'll see the blower wheel turn. Now we'll go ahead and put the front bulkhead in place. Now when installing the front bulkhead, we'll want to make sure that we tuck those two front rollers in underneath the drum. So we'll have to lift up on the drum as we're installing that. And also you'll note that there are a couple of tabs at the bottom of these top flanges, and they will fit into these uppermost rectangular holes, and that will hold that in place until we can get some screws on it. So drop the bottom right hand side in first so that it's up against the blower housing. Lift up on the drum just enough that the wheels will clear. And then lift the whole assembly up, hook those tabs in. Feel around and make sure that that felt stayed in place. And you should be able to rotate the drum while holding it on the bottom of that. There, we know everything's free there now. So next we'll put the two bottom retaining screws in. And next we'll reposition this support, line it up with those openings, make sure the two tabs fit down into the slots. And then install the two retaining screws. Now next we'll put the control panel back in position. We'll just lay that across the top of the drum first. We'll reconnect the wire harnesses, making sure that the locking tabs engage on those. And we'll also reinstall that zip tie to hold those harnesses in place. Now if you cut the original one, you'll need to install a new one there. We can reattach the white wire to the rear terminal on that light bulb. Make sure it fits nice and tight. And then we're ready to put the front panel on. Now when reinstalling the front panel, we'll want to make sure that we line up these four fasteners, two on the bottom, two on the top, with these rectangular holes in the edge of the side panels. And that will, they have a little hook on them, so that will hold them in place until we put the retaining screws in. At the same time, we're going to hold up on that harness so that it doesn't get jammed in the door opening. So we'll next reconnect that black wire to the light bulb and the 2-wire harness to the door switch. Make sure the locking tabs engage. We can install the 2 upper screws. Now we'll drop the control panel down into position. And you'll note that there are 3 locator tabs that line up with these rectangular holes. So make sure they're engaged, and then push it back into position, and then we'll install the 2 retaining screws on the top. Now next we'll install the 2 screws on the bottom of the front panel. And now we'll put the main top back on. Now when installing the top, we want to make sure that we line up these slotted openings with tabs across the top of the console. So sit it down about 1/2 inch back from the console and carefully slide it forward, making sure that those tabs engage. And then install the 2 retaining screws at the back. We're now ready to reconnect the power, and our repair is complete.